Welcome back to another episode of God Live B2B Jam Session. To start you all off, playing some awesome music from an artist that you all might know.
Really on the money.
Okay.
A chief queenie, a true independent. We hustle hard, brute force with precision.
Crisscross, arm flex, independent.
Move fast, with plans, big business. Stop cash, no fast.
It's a BBT Thursday, y'all.
Yes, we the winners. I'm in the heart, yeah, we be winning. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not just flex. I'm shorty, I'm tripping with the dick. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not just flex. I'm shorty, I'm tripping with the dick. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not just flex.
We have a really awesome guest for today who I'm really excited to speak to. One of my favorite leadership thought leaders on Twitter and LinkedIn. I swear you all are going to love him.
You deserve up a six.
Yeah.
Us, we only come for digits.
Shout out to the God Gals.
We, they be winning. Guy style, we the signal. BBT talk, yeah, she got figures. BBT bar, yeah, she be winning. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not your flex. Don't shorty up truck with the deck. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not your flex. Don't shorty up truck with the flex. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not your flex. Shorty up with the we pull up with the homies, yeah, not your flex. Don't shorty up truck with the flex. I just out here, we be killing. Black gal, ooh, she be sitting. Bush boy, we only make killings. All star, you already know the business. Homie, you ain't the business. Stop. I own the percentage. Stop. You wish you had a million. She fly with the digits. Girl, yes, we the winners. I'm in the heart, yeah, we be winning. Girl, yes, we the winners. I'm in the heart, yeah, we be winning. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not the play.
Let's go.
Don't show the young trucks with the stick. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not the play.
That is my new single, My Death Flex. It's out on Audius now. Guys, I love trap music, so it's work music. For those of you who don't know, I work to it. And here's the thing about my music. G-rated artist, and more importantly, no parental advisory needed. So check out Nija Flex. It's on Audius, and it's going to be out this weekend on Spotify and other stations. But with that said, I just wanted to get our energy and our blood pumping because we're about to talk to an amazing guest today. Someone who's always fired up, and he's actually the co-founder and CEO of Fire Leadership. And I'm really excited to introduce, I'm actually not even the co-founder, he's the founder and the chief fired officer of Fire Leadership. He is Paul McCarthy. And let me take these shades off because they're affecting my eyes. And he's a global thought leader on reframing why top talent gets fired. Literally reframing it. He's doing consulting, coaching, management, leadership, methodologies, created frameworks and tools around, one, how do you value your leaders within your organization? But also, how do you create the conditions for them to be courageous, to succeed, to thrive? And more importantly, for them to do why they're in your organization, why they're involved in your organization, to lead and be the best leaders possible. He's worked with companies such as BP, Deloitte, KPMG, National Health Services, PepsiCo, the Home Depot, and Thales Group. Man, he's coached and developed hundreds, and coming up thousands of leaders because he's truly leading a mission and a vision around fire leadership. And I, for one, I'm a huge fan of his. I follow him on LinkedIn. I follow him on Twitter. I'm myself a fire leader just because I'm fired up about this mission and movement that he's leading for not only this generation, but generations to come. And we're going to dive deep a little bit on his story, his background, and what inspired him to start Fire Leadership. With that said, let's go ahead and bring on the man of the hour, Paul McCarthy. Paul, such an honor to have you on the show today, man.
Tim, thank you. I've been listening backstage, and yeah, I love it. I love what you're doing. I love the energy you have. I've so much enjoyed the times that we've interacted on Twitter as well. And this is the time to have these kinds of conversations about the future of leadership. And I'm honored to be invited on and to have a chat with you. So yeah, let's take this wherever we want to take it and dive in.
So as everyone knows, God Live B2B Jam Session is unscripted. So everything that's always said on this show live, it comes from the heart. It comes from the heart and minds of all of our amazing guests, right? With that said, Paul, I want to ask you, tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start the Fire Leadership organization. What's been your journey as a leader to a point where you're like, I gotta love this thing, man.
Yeah, I get it asked all the time, and I'm a no nonsense kind of guy. I'm unscripted, I'm raw, and that can be quite divisive for people. So, but here's my story. I've been in the consulting and leadership space for about 25 years, and I've been fired from 4 executive leadership roles. And the reason I've been fired is ironically because of the qualities that I was hired for. So I was hired for the qualities through the recruitment process that I would later display as a leader in organizations. And by the way, one of my areas of expertise anyway is to do leadership development for clients. So I'd been hired by organizations to help lead them to then go out to deliver leadership development services. So part of my role is always to stay on top of the trends, what's coming in the future. But I was hired for these qualities that would eventually get me fired. And so this is such a fascinating conversation anyway to have, because the majority of us, when we talk about someone that's been fired, we have an image in our head that pops up. They're a troublemaker. They just don't fit in. They don't drink the Kool-Aid. And really what I'm talking about is I was fired for things like thinking differently, challenging the status quo, disrupting, being very clear that I didn't play the politics and the political games in organizations, and being real and being transparent. These would ultimately become what I would call the Fired Leadership Framework: fresh thinking, inquisitive nature, real and accountable, expressive and challenging, and direct and transparent. And there's a whole framework and methodology behind it with other such stuff. But that's my story, Tim. I displayed the qualities that I was hired for, and what I did was expose the dysfunction, hypocrisy, and what I call the ego-based leadership that exists in modern day leadership. So I got really curious, and I started to uncover that our leadership development industry, from identification, recruitment, onboarding, and development, costs over $400 billion a year, but is largely ineffective. So nobody's really talking about it. And so this was pre-COVID. I've been working on this for about 4 years. And the world will need more rebellious and disruptive leaders, but the qualities that we have today as leaders are being misinterpreted. And by the way, these qualities that I was fired from, they're needed for the future, and yet they don't appear in the leadership development programs that we send leaders onto. And nobody's talking about it. So I've started this quest to shift the narrative on a few things. One is why we fire talent for having these qualities that are misunderstood. 2, these qualities are actually needed for the future. And 3, the way that we're developing leaders currently isn't going to help us navigate future disruption. So I'm really kind of exposing the belly of the beast, and a lot of people don't like it because it questions their whole approach to leadership. But having said that, a lot of people do like it because they're saying it's about time we have honest-based conversations about the future of leadership.
100%. And essentially, what does a leader look like, right? And I think, often there are stereotypes around what a leader should look like within a large enterprise organization or within a tech industry, right? And it's often the guy with the collar and the nice suit and tie, and it's often from a demographic, maybe it looks like a white male, and we're currently at a generation now that sees through a lot of stuff like that, and we're starting to realize that whoever you are, no matter where you come from, you have the opportunity to be a leader if you think differently, as you're saying, Paul. And more importantly, if you are transparent, you're honest, and you're candid, and more importantly, you're inspired. One of the things I really love about Fire Leadership, and I've shared this with you before, is how you're bringing attention and you're rallying so many leaders around this. My next question for you is, talk to me a little bit about, what are the elements of a fired leader. Because I keep building a brain around this, man. And not saying that, and I don't think there's any negativity around being a part of fire leadership or being let go because you were a leader that thought differently. But what are the elements of a fire leader? Because a fire leader sounds like the type of leader organizations should want within their organizations, right? So talk to me a little bit about the elements of a fire leader.
And by the way, what I'll start by saying is that in the future, and we talked off backstage about this, why I'm doing this is to shift the future generations of leaders in terms of how they're identified, recruited, how they're looked upon in the organization. So for me, this is a bigger picture. And so the elements of a fire leader are, as the 5 qualities suggest, the fresh thinking. So someone that is able to dare and to actually think and do differently. So comes in, brings new ideas. Fresh thinking for me and my research that I've done behind the scenes is the precursor to having the ability to innovate, which then results in innovative products and outputs. If you don't create the conditions for people, not just leaders, but anyone to think and act differently, to fresh think, then you're really going to marginalize your ability to be successful. So that's the first thing. That's the first element. I call them qualities, but they're essentially the same kind of thing: elements, traits, characteristics. Inquisitive nature is the second one. So that's the guy and the girl that's always asking why. Why do we do things the way we do, right? We suppress that quality in our leaders, in fact, in our talent so much today. And I can bring out all the stats and the research and all that, but I don't want to bore people too much at this point. But there's all sorts of research that corroborates what I'm saying and what I will talk about. But we suppress inquisitiveness in our organizations, in our talent. And basically that makes people kind of, it's use it or lose it, right? We stifle that. And so if we don't have that, we don't have innovation, right? So we need to be curious and inquisitive. So that's the second element. The third one, and I've seen so many things on wall charts around the world with leadership teams around their guiding principles and how they work and how they show up, but it's about being real and accountable. So this means authenticity, vulnerability, integrity, transparency, but really not using that as a buzzword, showing up as your whole self, showing up as what we call a leader that does not wear a mask. And I don't mean a COVID mask. I mean a leader, a leader that does not check their humanity at the door and then comes in to become a leader. You are a whole brain, inclusive, human, heart-centered leader, right? Because you are real. That's the R. And the E is the expressive and challenging. So that's the guy or girl that comes in and says, why are we having the meeting? What's the objective? What's the purpose, right? Let's cut through the crap and let's be very clear on challenging things that don't work. So I'll just throw out a stat to you. 55 million meetings happen every day across North America, right? Half of those meetings leaders don't have to be in. The average exec spends about 45 years in their career. So about 22 years of that is spent in meetings, right? So the expressive element of the fire leader gets straight to the point. Why are we doing things? What's the output, the intended objective, etc.? And that not just makes business sense because it saves you a lot of money. It's the right thing to do in terms of working with your teams. So that's the E. Again, I'm very summarizing these very briefly, but there's lots of stuff behind the scenes to go into these. And the D is the direct and transparent. This is the quality that I think leaders do not have in our organizations today because they play the political game. And the D is about not playing the political game. The direct is about going in and not having an agenda, but being driven by a sense of higher evolutionary purpose. So refusing to play that game and the costs involved of politics, we all know it. We both know what the reality of what people think living and working in an organization is. And the D is about saying, no, you know what? I'm not going to abide by the political agenda. In fact, I'm going to choose to do something different. So they're the elements of the fired leader. And the fired leader is driven by that sense of something bigger than them, right? So 9 times out of 10, what people think when they see a fired leader, oh, they must have deserved it. They must have done something wrong. It's all their issue. But very few of us actually understand the qualities that we're firing leaders for in today's world, we're misinterpreting these, right? And those are the kind of key elements that we're going to need of leaders in the future. And so what I'm trying to do is reshift that narrative, destigmatize it, dispel some of the myths, and actually show how that kind of leadership is not just human and morally the right thing to do. It actually makes business sense, Tim.
That's so powerful, man. And you know, I think you're about to wake up so many who are in corporate America and in leadership positions who are not hip to this way of thinking about, you know, I think the next generation of leadership. You know, tell me, was there a point in your journey as a leader? You know, you mentioned that you've been fired because you were brought in to do the work that you were supposed to do. Was there a moment that you realized, you know what, man, we need a better way. All of this is a facade, right? Was there a moment? Can you describe and share that moment with us?
Yeah, you know, so the majority of people who get fired, they typically do this. They go in, they self-reflect, and they think I'm the issue. I must have done something wrong, right? And so then they get a self-development book. They work through their issues. They massage their resume and they move on. I didn't do that, right? So for me, the moment that the recurring moment is when I've gone through 6 to 9 interviews on average to get a leadership position, and they spent a shed load of money on me to get me into the organization, time and money. I come on, I practice what I preach, and basically I'm chastised and blacklisted and eventually fired for the things that I was hired for. That was the recurring moment that I started to realize we spend a lot of money on a system that doesn't work, right? And I'm the messenger that's being shot every time because I'm daring to turn up as the person that I was hired to be. So that's happened on 4 occasions, and I doubt that I'm the only one that's happened to. But what I do think, because my research corroborates this, is nobody is talking about this subject in the world. Nobody. Right? Yeah, we talk about toxicity, we talk about rebel talent, and there's some great scholars out there in this area, but nobody's talking about the fact that we fire the very leaders that we need for the future because we don't understand the qualities that they turn up with. And that is a really big message that corporate America and the world, quite frankly, need to realize, because the next generation of leaders are going to be driven and motivated by something completely different than the way that we've led up until now.
Man, you're preaching to the choir, man. You're preaching to the choir as someone that's worked in corporate America. Not necessarily a fire leader, but a leader that just didn't fit the mold of what was expected of me in those environments. So, you know, I started my own company and I ventured out and I do my own thing now. But I want to touch on a little bit, because what I love about what you're saying, Paul, is that, you know, organizations should embrace these types of leaders and also encourage and ensure that their environment supports these kinds of leaders. And the reality is that when I hear what you're saying, there's nothing wrong about having the qualities of a fired leader, actually. In fact, every organization should think about, how do you operationalize it a little bit more within the leadership ranks or within those who could become leaders. Am I hearing you correctly here, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, what my plan is as to develop the practice around fire leadership is to bring this into organizations, right? Is to actually, rather than go into an organization and blow up the system and say everything's not working, follow this. That's not what I'm suggesting. You know, what I'm doing is I'm taking the approach of almost a Trojan horse, going in there to understand organizations and their levels of toxicity and talent, to speak their language, to say, here's how we can actually help you, right? And a lot of this comes back down to systemic challenges at the organization, at the institutional level, right? And I call it in the academic world, it's called the normalization of deviance. And in a nutshell, what that means is that we start to accept things that don't work. Silo-based behavior at leadership level, for instance, or being left out of the meeting, or the meeting before the meeting, or the closed door post-meeting meeting. These are all things in corporate America that happen right as we speak every day. And they've become so internalized and institutionalized into the walls of how organizations are structured, that they're not questioned anymore, that they're accepted as the right thing to do, but they're not, because what they contribute to, Tim, is that increasing level of disengagement, which Gallup estimates to be about $7 trillion a year globally and rising. And left unchecked, our organizations are decaying, right? And so we set against that backdrop, there's another macro level shift as part of the future of work that's happening around self-managing organizational structures. So this is how to shift the way we structure organizations. COVID, as tragic as it's been, has been an accelerator for that conversation. So I'm confident that we're at the precipice of a point where we have to say, look, do we take the blue pill or the red pill? Right? Because you can carry on in the way you've done it and get the results you've got, or you can open up to a new opportunity where the future presents something completely different, and there is no playbook for that. So I'm trying to get into organizations and understand their language, understand their fears, and speak to them on their level to say, here's another way of doing this, because the way you're doing it right now doesn't work. And I'm the only one that's got the courage to come out and say that live and say it's not working. You know, I don't want to play the game. I've never enjoyed playing the game because it costs us so much money and in our humanity as well, Tim.
Yeah, no, you preaching, man. Nah, dude, this is some inspiring stuff, Paul. I want to ask you, for you worked with a lot of organizations in the past. Can you share a little bit more about your experiences working with some of the organizations I mentioned earlier in the intro? What was that like in breaking and kind of introducing them to this model? Share a little bit with us, to those who are listening and may want you to work with them within their organization.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting post that I put out on Twitter, I think a few months ago. It's kind of like, it says like, when you're introducing new ideas that are dissenting, then you're considered a pariah. But when people start to understand and adopt these ideas and ways of thinking, you're now considered a game changer, right? So for me, I'm curious about what underpins that, but that's a separate conversation, I think. But the organizations that I've gone into and talked about fired leadership with, there's a sense of trepidation, right? There's a sense of nerves because they've always relied on the tried and tested ways. The standardized and simplified way of doing things has always worked, hasn't it? But it actually hasn't. It's been quietly toxic underpinning this the entire time, and nobody really wants to talk about it. So what we have in organizations that you've mentioned I've worked in, which are all great organizations in their own ways and have leaders and leadership teams that are really, driven by a sense of, wanting to do something different, is they have that systemic overarching groupthink, right? So that groupthink is, we don't like new ideas. We say we do, but we don't like dissenting perspectives, because what that does to us, Tim, is it makes us uncomfortable, right? So I'm an anthropologist by academic background, and I'm driven to understand why we do the things we do and why we don't do the things that we want to do. And so rituals, norms, values, they comprise our culture, right? And so these organizations, they have so many things like, a new idea comes in, but because it's not supported, because people don't understand it fully, they're too fearful of letting go of the old. And so the groupthink kicks in. And you know this in your own world. It's like you get the laggards, you get the early adopters, and somewhere in between you get the mainstream, right? And it's not until enough of the early adopters start to talk about this that the mainstream say, I suppose there's something to this and we should talk about it. But what I'm finding at the moment is there's the opportunity is to change the mindset first, is to have that conversation, because all the tools and the frameworks and the enablers and all that are in place to support clients. But the conversation that really revs me up and fires me up is getting in front of people and talking about their mindsets and understanding where they are, what they're fearful of, what they need to let go of, and what it would look like once they do. And that is the new currency, I think, of the future when we talk about shifting mindsets. So I've encountered that in every one of those and others. I've worked for hundreds of different organizations in a client capacity. Every one of them, here's the thing, Tim, every one of them has the following. They have the nice one-page laminate menu on the wall that says we lead with integrity, purpose, transparency, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's great. Ironically, I've probably developed those for them, right? Then you go into the leadership team's offices one by one, and they're all very nice people, again, all very nice people. And you see all the books from the gurus that they have been reading. And then you see the way they lead. And there's a complete incongruence, largely, between those three data points. And so my question is why? And that's to the mindset that I just talked about. And that's the kind of focus that I have on the work we're doing, to get in and talk about the uncomfortable, question the unquestionable, and surface a new opportunity.
Wow. That's powerful, Paul. So for you in your journey now you're an entrepreneur, you're building this organization, what would you say have been some of the biggest challenges, trying to build a movement around fire leadership, man, for you?
Yeah. I mean, Tim, I know we were talking offline about this, on the daily, I think anyone who's venturing into new paths is going to get overwhelmed, right? They're going to face their demons on a daily basis. They're going to have trollers and haters. They're going to have people who don't understand. They're going to have people that throw a lot of mud. We know it, right? It happens on the daily. For me, some of the challenges have been, how do I deal with that? How do I cope with that, right? And I thankfully have a great bunch of supportive people that help me behind the scenes. I have blind spot coaches that help me when I need to realize what my role in all this is and how I'm letting myself down. But we're human, right? So my challenge is how do I navigate that at the same time as bringing, like, my own personal demons, at the same time when I'm bringing something new into the world, where part of what I'm doing over the next 6 to 12 months is to educate and raise awareness of a new concept, right? So that's going to invite challenge anyway. So it's like having that strong foundation in place is really needed to be able to face the critics, right? Let alone then when we go out and introduce this into the organization, the corporate world, there are another set of challenges that I alluded to earlier. But there's some of the key challenges I've faced, my own personal challenges, right? And as I said, some of your tweets just turn up in my feed at the time they're meant to, right? When I've had one of those days, or the hummingbird outside right now that turns up when I'm having one of those days, and I'm just thinking to myself, I know why I'm doing this, for the bigger picture. So there's those challenges. Then there's the challenges, as I said, kind of like moving out into the world of other leadership scholars. There's some people that have attached their identity to their work, and they're reluctant to let that go because they realize it doesn't work anymore. But they're rehashing the same stuff. And again, they're all very nice people and they know who they are. But the future of leadership requires us to put our egos, our preconditioned views to the side. And what I really want to do is create a mosaic where we talk about the future of leadership in an egoless way. Right? So the challenge of that, where I'm not just promoting my speaking topics, my programs, I'm doing it because I want to advance the craft, right? Genuinely want to advance the craft. Not everybody's on the same page as that yet, because they're all trying to put food on the table, and I appreciate it. But what are you really in it for? And I've seen a few challenges that way, because everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in building something that doesn't even need me at the helm, right? And then the last challenge I mentioned, like getting into the corporate world with that mindset challenge, and that's part of what revs me up, as I mentioned, like moving in and dispelling some of the myths that people have.
Yeah, man, dude, you have an amazing framework and an amazing mission. Anyone that follows fire leadership and you online can feel that. With that said, Paul, thank you so much for joining us, man. We have to ask you, when is your book coming out? When are you going to write the book on fire leadership?
Well, and that is a lovely question, because there's 3 books planned. The first one is actually almost finished as we speak, and that's introducing the concept, the framework, and introducing the idea into the world. The second one is going to be global interviews of fired leaders, so leaders who have been fired and leaders who have the fired qualities. And I'm going to piece that together in a kind of a companion thumbs guide where it says, here's what I learned as a leader that was fired, here's my tips and tricks, and here's what I would avoid. So that's going to be really informational interview. That's the second book. And then the third one is going to be how do we institutionalize this as a new way of talking about leadership? It's almost like an academy concept, right? But the first book is where we are now. And I reckon we're between 6 and 12 months off. I mean, we've got, Tim, you know what it's like, that whole industry of publishing, right? So you might write a manuscript, you go through the process to get it in front of publishers, you go through all that process, and I'm in that stage right now. But I am pleased to say that I'm seeing light at the end of the tunnel. The first book will be coming out. Within the next 6 to 12 months, it will be called The Fired Leader: Reinventing the Future of Leadership.
Awesome.
And so it's coming.
We're excited to read it, and we need to have you on the show once it drops there for the world to consume, man.
I'd love to.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul, for joining us today, man. We appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing where the Fire Leadership movement goes, man.
And Tim, thank you for the platform. Thank you for your continued followership as well, and your words of wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Talk to you soon, my friend.
Thank you.
And that was Paul McCarthy joining us today, talking a little bit more about the Fire Leadership movement. Don't you just love him? I love his energy, and I love his mindset, man. Definitely give him a follow. With that said, make sure to get your Big Black Tea at bigblacktea.com. Sip with us. Have mine today. It's been a long morning. Happy Thursday to those who are tuned in. Appreciate y'all for joining us. And also make sure you sign up for our wait list at guidegroup.com. We are gradually expanding our beta to a few select small to medium businesses. All right, y'all. Not going to leave you all out cold like usual. Gonna play a jam for you all. It's hot. Get you fired up this nice Thursday afternoon. On the count of 1, 2, 3. Yeah. All right, y'all. Peace.
Big content, really on the money. A chief queenie, a true independent. We hustle hard, brute force with precision. Crisscross, arm flex, independent. Move fast, win flash, big business. Bout cash, no flash, mind of business. Girl, yes, we the winners. I'm in the heart, yeah, we be winning. We pull up with the homie, yeah, and I just flex. Coach Shorty, I'm stripping with the dick. We pull up with the homie, yeah, and I just flex. Coach Shorty, I'm stripping with the dick. We pull up with the homie, yeah, and I just flex. Coach Shorty, I'm stripping with the dick. We pull up with the homie, yeah, and I just flex. Coach Shorty, I'm stripping with the dick. Bang, my label be the image. Shares, yeah, we got plenty. You deserve a percentage. Us, we only come for digits. Guy, we, they be winning. Guy style, we the signal. Hit it. BBT talk, yeah, she got figures. BBT bar, yeah, she be winning. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not just flex. Told Shorty, I'm struggling with the dick. We pull up with the homies, yeah, just flex. Told Shorty, I'm struggling with the dick. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not just flex. Told Shorty, I'm struggling with the dick. We pull up with the homies, yeah, not just flex. Told Shorty, I'm struggling with the dick. I got style, man, we be killing. Black gal, ooh, she be stealing. Bush boy, we only make killings. All star, you already know the business. Homie, you ain't with the business. Stop, I own the percentage. Stop, you wish you had a game. Made it, she fly with the digits. Girl, yes, we the winners. I'm in the heart, yeah, we be winning. Girl, yes, we the winners. I'm in the heart, yeah, we be winning.